Olivia thought her past was behind her, until a shocking encounter with her ex-husband, Brandon, and his new fiancée, Vanessa, brought everything crashing back. Secrets, lies, and a powerful journey of self-discovery unfold as Olivia faces her past head, on all while Vanessa's own world unravels. Will they find freedom from the shadows of their pasts? This story will leave you questioning everything about love, power, and self-worth. Who will rise? And who will rise and who will fall? Where are you watching from today? Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more twists and turns in this unforgettable story. Olivia Richardson sat in the corner of a small cafe in San Francisco, her fingers gently tracing the rim of her cappuccino cup as she stared out the window at the gray afternoon. It was one of those rare, quiet moments that felt like a breath of fresh air after the storm of her past. The rain had been relentless all day, casting a muted tone over the city, but for Olivia, the downpour was almost a comfort, a reminder of how far she had come. A year ago, she would have never imagined she'd be sitting here, calm, composed, and free from the wreckage of her marriage to Ethan Sullivan. Her thoughts meandered back to the day they had signed their divorce papers, both of them numb, emotionally drained from years of escalating tension. The shouting matches, the endless accusations, the bitterness that had poisoned every corner of their life together. It all felt like a distant nightmare now. Their marriage, which had once felt so promising, had cracked under the weight of Ethan's ambition. At first, it had been exciting, the shared dreams, the late-night talks about building a future together. But soon, his drive to succeed turned into something far more toxic. His desire for success consumed him, pushing him further and further and further away from Olivia. Where she had once hoped for a partner who would stand beside her, Ethan had become a corporate machine, and she had become little more than an accessory to his success. Arguments over money, status, and priorities had become the norm, and as much as she had tried to make it work, it eventually became clear that their paths were no longer aligned. She had fought for a love that no longer existed until she finally let go, signing the papers with a heavy heart, but no regret. Olivia had thrown herself into rebuilding her life. She had always been talented, but it wasn't until the divorce that she fully realized her own potential. She opened her own interior design business, Carter Design Studio, and while it was small, it was hers. She had found something to call her own, a piece of herself she had nearly lost in the wreckage of her marriage. The work was fulfilling, and slowly, she began to build a client list, gaining recognition for her unique approach to design. It was during this period that she met Luke Montgomery. At first, she had been hesitant. He was, after all, a billionaire. But Luke was nothing like the men she had known. He wasn't arrogant or self-absorbed. He was calm, collected, and so genuinely kind that it took Olivia by surprise. He didn't look at her as a project or as someone to impress. He saw her for who she truly was. He saw her for who she truly was, a woman capable of achieving anything she set her mind to. Their relationship had been slow to develop, but every moment with Luke felt different. He treated her with the kind of respect she hadn't realized she had been missing. The more time they spent together, the more Olivia allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something new, something real. He didn't need to flaunt his wealth or use it to make her feel inferior. Luke was quietly confident, generous, and unexpectedly modest for a man of his stature. And just as she had begun to trust in him, to let herself believe in a future that was free from the chains of her past, fate had other plans. The last thing Olivia had expected that day was a chance encounter with Ethan. As the cafe door jingled, she glanced up, expecting to see Luke walking in, as he'd promised. Instead, her stomach dropped when she saw Ethan standing there, his expensive umbrella dripping water onto the floor as he scanned the room. His presence hit her like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, it was as if no time had passed at all. He was still the same man, tall, confident, wearing a tailored suit that screamed success. But it wasn't just his appearance that rattled her. It was the old, familiar ache that stirred inside her chest, the kind she thought she had buried long ago. Ethan saw her almost immediately. His eyes widened in recognition, and he walked toward her with a cautious curiosity, as if unsure of what to say. "Olivia," he said, his voice still carrying the faint hint of arrogance that had always been there. "Wow, long time no see." Olivia forced a smile, keeping her voice steady despite the emotions that swirled inside her. "Yes, it's been a while." She tried to remain calm, but her hands trembled slightly as she set her coffee cup down. The memories came rushing back, of fights, tears, and unspoken resentment. The last time she had seen him, it had been under the cold, sterile light of the lawyer's office, signing the papers that severed everything they had built together. She braced herself for the usual sharp remarks, the snide comments. But instead, Ethan's tone softened, almost apologetic. "I know things didn't end well," he said, awkwardly wiping a non-existent spot on the table with his napkin. "But I do hope you're doing okay." It was as if time had folded in on itself, and for a moment, she was back in that place, back to the days when she had hoped Ethan would change, when she had begged him to care. But now, looking at him, she realized just how much she had changed. And it wasn't just her that had evolved. Ethan, too, had become someone she didn't recognize anymore. A stranger. "I'm doing fine," she replied softly, "just taking things one day at a time." And she meant it. She was done being caught in the past. The woman who had once cried over their marriage was gone, replaced by someone who was finally starting to feel whole again. But that was before the door opened again, and a new presence swept into the cafe. Luke had arrived, and with him, everything changed. The bell above the cafe door jingled again, and Olivia's heart skipped a beat as she turned, expecting to see Luke walking in, just as he had promised. But when she saw him, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the doorway, stood Ethan's familiar figure. Her stomach tightened. For a fleeting moment, the cafe seemed to grow distant, the sound of chatter muffled by the rush of blood in her ears. "Ethan." 2 years had passed since she last saw him, but it felt like only yesterday that they were locked in a bitter argument in the lawyer's office, signing papers that severed their lives together. He was still the same, tall, confident, wearing a charcoal gray suit that screamed success. His gaze swept over the room, landing on her, and it was as if the years had dissolved into nothing. For a split second, she considered hiding behind her coffee cup, pretending she hadn't seen him. But the moment the thought entered her mind, it was too late. Ethan had already spotted her, and there was no turning back. He walked toward her with a mix of curiosity and caution. And, when he reached her table, he stood for a beat longer than necessary, his presence making the air feel heavier. His voice, when he spoke, was low but still carried that edge she remembered so well. "Olivia," he said, as if unsure whether to offer a friendly greeting or just acknowledge her in some detached, corporate manner. "Wow, long time no see." She had been prepared for this, or at least she thought she was. But seeing him, seeing the man who had once been her whole world, hit her with an unexpected force. She wasn't prepared for the mix of emotions that surged inside her. The memories of the life they had shared, the intimacy, the hope that had once felt so real, and yet now it felt like she was looking at a stranger who had broken her heart and shattered her self-worth with his constant criticism and ambition. "Yes, it's been a while," Olivia replied, her voice steady, though there was a slight tremor in her hands as she set her coffee cup down. She didn't want to let him see how unsettled she was. The anger, the resentment that had once been a constant companion was still there. But it wasn't what was dominating her mind in this moment. She realized, in that instant, that she was no longer the woman who had clung to hope for a love that had long since passed. She had moved on. She had built a life without him, and she would not let him see how deeply he still affected her. Ethan took a seat across from her, pulling out the chair without asking, just as he always had. He didn't care that the other customers were waiting. It was as if the world had always bent to his will. His posture, as always, was relaxed but held that air of superiority, the one that made him feel like he belonged in a different world than the rest of them. "I heard you moved back to the city," he said, his voice casual, though there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning her as if trying to place her in the same context she had once occupied in his life. "I'm doing fine," Olivia replied, forcing a calm smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. The words felt distant even as she said them. "Just taking things one day at a time," she added, her thoughts briefly drifting to her interior design business, the career she had fought so hard to build. For once, it felt like that was all that mattered. Not Ethan, not his demands or criticisms. "You look good," Ethan said, leaning back slightly in his chair, his voice more sincere than she had expected. But it felt off, as if the compliment was meant to fill a gap, to ease the awkwardness of their unexpected encounter. He didn't know what to say, and it showed in the stiffness of his words. The air between them thickened. Olivia wasn't sure if she should apologize for how everything had turned out, but the idea of apologizing for her own pain, for her own survival, felt foreign to her now. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't sorry for the woman she had become in the wake of their marriage falling apart. She wasn't sorry for choosing herself. "How have you been?" he asked, though it didn't sound as if he really cared. It was just another question designed to fill the empty space between them, a space that once had been filled with love and connection. Now, it was just filled with silence, and Olivia's mind raced to shut down the flood of memories that threatened to overwhelm her. "I'm doing okay," Olivia said quietly, then took a deep breath. "Really, I am." And she was. She had come so far in the past 2 years. The woman who sat before Ethan now was nothing like the woman who had once pleaded for his approval, who had begged for his love. That woman had been broken, her confidence stripped away by his sharp words, his need to control every aspect of her life. But not anymore. The bell above the door jingled again, and this time, Olivia's heart skipped in a different way. She looked up, expecting to see Luke. Instead, she saw him, the man who had walked into her life like a breath of fresh air. Damon Westwood, her boyfriend, stood in the doorway, scanning the room with a calm demeanor. He looked effortlessly composed, dressed in a tailored navy blazer and matching slacks, the kind of man who didn't need to announce his wealth. It was evident in every graceful step he took. His eyes found hers immediately, and when he smiled, the warmth of that smile sent a rush of comfort through her. "Sorry I'm late," Damon said, walking over to the table with his usual quiet confidence. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, pressing a soft kiss to her cheek. The gesture was small, but it was enough to steady the storm inside her. She had moved on. She was no longer that fragile woman clinging to the past. Ethan's expression shifted as his eyes flicked between her and Damon, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before it was replaced with something colder. Calculating. "So this is—" Ethan trailed off, his voice laced with skepticism. Olivia could feel the tension rise, thick and heavy in the air, but she held her ground. "This is Damon Westwood," Olivia said, her voice steady, though a part of her was shaken. "My boyfriend." The words felt like an anchor, pulling her deeper into the reality of the life she'd built. And for the first time, she felt no fear in saying them aloud. "Damon, this is Ethan Sullivan, my ex-husband," she added, a small flicker of something darker passing through her. She didn't need to explain herself, but she felt the weight of that introduction, the years of history that it carried. The two men exchanged a stiff handshake, each sizing the other up, in a way that felt almost primal. Olivia couldn't help but feel a sense of pride at the way Damon handled the exchange. There was no bravado, no need to prove himself. He was simply who he was, and that was enough. Ethan, on the other hand, looked like he was trying to digest the situation, his eyes flickering between them. Olivia could sense the shift in him, the subtle realization that his carefully constructed world was being disrupted in ways he didn't fully understand. "Well, I should get going," Ethan said abruptly, his voice tinged with discomfort. "I have to pick up Clara." The mention of Clara struck a chord in Olivia's chest, but she masked it with a calm exterior. She had long since stopped caring about Ethan's new life, about the woman who had replaced her in his world. "Nice running into you, Olivia," Ethan said, his tone forced. "And nice meeting you, Mr. Westwood." Damon gave a small smile. "Likewise." "Take care," he said, his voice even but carrying a subtle firmness that Olivia appreciated. And with that, Ethan was gone, leaving behind a trail of expensive cologne and unanswered questions. Olivia let out a slow breath, feeling a strange mix of relief and disbelief. She wasn't sure what she had expected from this encounter, but she was certain of one thing. She was done carrying the weight of Ethan's past. Her future was no longer tied to him. It belonged to her, and to Damon, the man who had quietly become her anchor. Olivia sat back in her chair, her cappuccino now lukewarm, forgotten in the flurry of emotions that had just swept over her. She glanced out the window at the rain, which had finally slowed, the dark clouds lifting to reveal a sliver of blue sky. But the storm that had been brewing inside her was far from over. She felt a strange mixture of relief and unease, the kind that comes from confronting something you've buried deep, only to realize it hasn't gone away completely. Ethan had left, but his presence still lingered in the cafe, in her chest, in the space between her and Damon. "Are you okay?" Damon's voice was steady, but there was a subtle edge to it, the kind that Olivia recognized as concern. She looked up to find him watching her closely, his brow furrowed just enough to show he was paying attention. She nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine," she said, but even to her own ears the words sounded hollow. She wasn't fine. Not really. She hadn't been fine for years when she was with Ethan, always walking on eggshells, always second-guessing herself, always trying to please someone who could never be pleased. The anger that had once consumed her had simmered down over time, but it was still there, just beneath the surface, like a crack in the foundation of everything she had tried to rebuild since their divorce. Damon's gaze softened and he leaned forward, gently placing his hand on top of hers. The simple touch, the warmth of his fingers, grounded her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. "You don't have to go through this alone, Olivia," he said quietly, his voice a comforting balm against the raw edges of her emotions. Olivia took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as she met his eyes. He was right. She didn't have to go through this alone. And yet there was something about this moment that felt like it was drawing a line in the sand, a definitive boundary between her past and her present. A part of her wanted to dive into the past, to revisit all the hurt, the brokenness, the shame of feeling unworthy. But another part of her, the part that had been growing stronger over the past year, knew that she couldn't afford to look back anymore. Not now. Not when she'd finally begun to see herself clearly for the first time in a long while. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible as the words left her lips. "It's just... seeing him again, it brings everything back, the good, the bad, everything in between." She paused, searching for the right words. "I thought I was over it. I thought I was stronger." "You are," Damon said softly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "You've been stronger than you think. And you've built a life for yourself, Olivia. A good life. You don't need to prove anything to him, or to anyone." His words struck a chord deep within her, resonating in a way she hadn't expected. She had been so focused on moving forward, on proving to herself that she could survive without Ethan, that she had forgotten to honor the strength it had taken to get to this point. There had been days when she wasn't sure she would make it, when the weight of their failed marriage seemed too heavy to bear. But here she was, sitting across from a man who saw her for who she truly was, who didn't need her to be anything more than herself. And that was everything. Olivia squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his support, the steady rhythm of his presence. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to let go of the guilt, the self-doubt that had followed her like a shadow for years. "I'm tired, Damon," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "Tired of carrying the weight of the past. Tired of being the person who always feels like they're not enough." Damon's expression softened, and he moved his chair closer to hers. "You're more than enough, Olivia," he said firmly, his voice unwavering. "You've always been enough, and anyone who didn't see that wasn't worth your time." She felt a tear slip down her cheek, surprising her. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, how much she had longed for someone to remind her that she was worthy, just as she was worthy, just as she was, that the past didn't have to define her future. "I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping the tear away quickly, as if embarrassed by the vulnerability she had allowed to show. "Don't apologize," Damon said gently, his hand still resting on hers. "You don't have to hide from me, Olivia. Not ever." He gave her a reassuring smile, his eyes full of understanding. Olivia nodded, taking a deep breath. The storm inside her was still there, but for the first time, she felt like she could weather it. She could face the past, not with the fear and pain it had once carried, but with a sense of acceptance. The past had shaped her, yes, but it no longer had the power to control her. She had rebuilt herself from the wreckage, piece by piece, and now, with Damon by her side, she was ready to let go of the weight that had held her down for so long. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice filled with a newfound strength. "I'm ready to move forward. With you." Damon smiled, his hand tightening around hers in silent agreement. "Then, let's go forward together," he said. And in that moment, Olivia knew that no matter what came next, she was no longer alone. The next few days passed in a blur of emotions, excitement, and the occasional flicker of doubt. Olivia tried to bury herself in her work, focusing on the new design projects that had come her way since her encounter with E. Then, she poured herself into her interior design studio, Carter Design Studio, but even the comfort of creating beautiful spaces couldn't fully quell the storm brewing inside her. The more she tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to persist, nagging at her like an unfinished conversation. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan's sudden reappearance wasn't just a chance encounter. Something about it felt like a thread pulling at her life, unraveling what she had so carefully built. It wasn't long before Olivia received the invitation. The glossy cream-colored envelope appeared one morning, its gold embossing a sharp contrast against the otherwise plain mailbox. Her heart dropped when she saw the return address. It was from Brandon, and of course, he wasn't the one sending it. Vanessa's name was boldly written across the front. Olivia held the envelope for a moment, the weight of it suddenly feeling so heavy, as though it were a symbol of everything she had tried to leave behind. She had no desire to attend. She didn't need to be reminded of her past, of the man who had once controlled her life and love. But the invitation was impossible to ignore. The grand affair was to be held at the Four Seasons Hotel, a spectacle of wealth and power that Olivia had no intention of participating in. And yet, as she stared at the invitation, her mind couldn't help but drift back to that time. Before the divorce, before everything fell apart, the promise of something beautiful, something lasting, had seemed so tangible, so close. But now, it was nothing more than a distant memory, replaced by a bitter taste in her mouth. She set the invitation down on her kitchen table and tried to push it out of her mind, but the thought lingered, like a shadow refusing to leave. Later that afternoon, she was sitting in her apartment, her fingers absent-mindedly flipping through old photo albums. She hadn't opened these in months, maybe years. The photos of her and Brandon from college. The younger versions of themselves full of hope, smiling in front of their dorm building, seemed almost foreign now. How could they have been so sure back then? How could they have believed in a future that would slip through their fingers so easily? Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a text from Amamira, her longtime friend and confidant. "Did you see the article in the Chronicle about Brandon's upcoming engagement party? Sounds like it's going to be huge. It's practically the talk of the town. You okay?" Olivia quickly typed a response. "I'm fine. Just a bit surprised. We ran into each other the other day." Amamira's response came fast, full of shock and disbelief. "He's really showing off with Vanessa. Apparently, her family has some serious pull. The whole event is going to be insane." Olivia let out a slow breath, a flicker of bitterness crawling up her throat. The pomp and circumstance of it all felt so excessive. She could almost hear the judgment in Amamira's words. Brandon had always been obsessed with status, with proving his worth through appearances. It was all part of the performance. This engagement, the party, the wedding. It was never about love, not for him. It was about power, influence, and control. Olivia tried to dismiss the thoughts, telling herself she was done with him, done with that world. She had her own life now, her own successes. Carter Design Studio was flourishing, and Luke, Damon, had been a steady presence, always calm, always supportive. She had found a quiet happiness with him, a kind of peace that she had never known before. He didn't want her to be anyone other than who she was. He valued her for her work, for her heart, and not for some external validation. But even as she sat there feeling the warmth of his words in her heart, a small, insistent part of her felt something she couldn't name. Something that tugged at her, pulling her toward the past, toward the event that was now just days away. The night of the party arrived quickly. Damon had picked her up from her apartment, his car sleek and black, the driver holding the door open for her like she was someone who deserved that kind of treatment. She had insisted on taking a cab when he first showed up with the driver. He was too much, too grand. But now, with every passing moment, she was slowly accepting the life Damon lived. It wasn't about him showing off. It was just the world he moved in, a world so different from her own. They arrived at the Four Seasons, where the entrance was flanked with sleek black cars, paparazzi snapping photos of the high-profile guests who arrived. The lavish floral arrangements inside were like something out of a fairy tale. The guests dressed to the nines, their faces carefully sculpted with smiles. Olivia felt a sense of discomfort settle in her chest. She didn't belong here. She wasn't that woman anymore, but in moments like this, it was hard not to feel like an outsider. Brandon stood at the front, just as polished and self-assured as she remembered. His eyes flickered toward her and Damon as they entered the ballroom. He hadn't expected to see her, and that much was clear from the confusion in his gaze. His fiancée, Vanessa, stood beside him. Graceful, poised, the perfect partner in every sense of the word. Olivia smiled at her politely, but there was something about Vanessa that unsettled her. The polite, almost rehearsed greeting from Vanessa felt like a facade, a performance that Olivia didn't want to be part of. The tension in the room seemed to thicken as the night went on. Olivia tried to enjoy herself, tried to smile and blend in, but all she could think about was the drama unfolding around her. It wasn't long before she spotted a familiar face. David, one of Brandon's old colleagues, who greeted her with a familiarity that didn't sit right. Planning on attending the engagement party, Natalie? David asked, his voice full of smugness. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Natalie could feel her blood run cold. How did David know? Was this all some kind of trap? The night had barely begun, and yet she already felt the unease creeping in, the unspoken tension, the reminder that this world was no longer hers to navigate. There was something simmering beneath the surface, something that would soon come crashing to the forefront. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the Four Seasons ballroom grew increasingly tense. Olivia could feel it in the air. Something was about to crack. Her stomach twisted, a growing sense of unease gnawing at her as she glanced at Damon, who stood beside her with an air of quiet confidence, though she could tell he, too, sensed the shift. The music, the laughter, the soft clinking of glasses, it all felt distant now, like the calm before a storm. She couldn't quite pinpoint what was happening, but the air had thickened, charged with the energy of unspoken words and unaddressed tensions. Brandon and Vanessa's engagement celebration was supposed to be a picture, perfect evening, a demonstration of their success, their power, their shared future. But as Olivia watched Brandon interact with his guests, she could see the cracks in the polished facade. There was a tension in his jaw, a flicker of impatience in his eyes as he introduced Vanessa to anyone who would listen, all while keeping his gaze sharp and calculating, as if scanning the room for something or someone. Vanessa, for her part, appeared every bit the poised, perfect fiancée, her smile tight and her movements just a little too practiced. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that there was something lurking just beneath the surface of their perfect relationship, something that neither of them was willing to acknowledge. The moment came suddenly without warning. As Brandon made his way to the front of the room, microphone in hand, the crowd fell silent, all eyes turning to him. He cleared his throat, and with his usual calculated charm, began thanking everyone for attending. His words were polished, rehearsed, dripping with the same false humility that had once made Olivia feel small in their marriage. She felt her pulse quicken, the familiar burn of resentment rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. Tonight wasn't about him anymore. Tonight was about her, about the woman she had become, the woman who no longer needed his approval to feel whole. "Vanessa and I are so thrilled to have all of you here tonight," Brandon said, his voice smooth and confident. "We're looking forward to the many milestones ahead. Thank you all for your support." The applause was polite, obligatory, but it didn't feel sincere. Olivia felt a strange detachment from the scene, like she was watching it all from a distance. Brandon handed the microphone to Vanessa, who took it with a smile that was every bit as rehearsed as his own. "I couldn't be more grateful to have Brandon by my side," Vanessa began, her voice calm and controlled. "We're looking forward to many exciting things together. Thank you all for being here to share in our happiness." Olivia's gaze flickered to the corner of the room, where a group of Brandon's old colleagues stood, their eyes flicking between her and Damon, with the kind of curiosity she had come to expect. As much as she tried to focus on the conversation at hand, the tension in the room kept drawing her attention elsewhere. It felt like the walls were closing in on her, the air growing heavier with every passing minute. And then, just as the music resumed, everything changed. A voice cut through the hum of the ballroom, a sharp, cutting voice that sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. Olivia turned, and there she was, Patricia Walsh. Patricia Walsh, Brandon's mother, her gaze sharp and calculating as she approached with a smile that could freeze water. "Olivia," Patricia said, her voice dripping with thinly veiled judgment. "It's been a while." The words were laced with a past that Olivia had long since tried to bury, and for a moment she could feel the weight of Patricia's gaze, as if she were mentally measuring her worth, comparing her to the polished version of herself that Patricia had always expected. "I see you're here with someone new," Patricia continued, her eyes flicking over to Damon, who had stood by Olivia's side the entire evening, his calm demeanor never wavering. Damon extended his hand with a quiet grace, his voice steady as he introduced himself. Damon Westwood. It's a pleasure to meet you. Patricia took his hand, her grip just a little too firm, her eyes flicking over him with the same sharp calculation. Olivia could tell that Patricia wasn't impressed, that she didn't think Damon fit the mold she had hoped for her son's ex-wife. Patricia was used to power, to wealth, to the kind of people who controlled rooms, not those who quietly commanded respect. "I suppose it's good to see you've moved on, Olivia," Patricia said, her smile a tight line, barely concealing the disdain beneath. "Though some of us still wonder if you ever appreciated what Brandon gave you." Her words stung, but Olivia wasn't the same woman who had once crumpled under Patricia's icy gaze. She stood tall, her back straight, her voice unwavering. "With all due respect, Patricia," Olivia said, her tone calm but firm, "that's no longer your concern." She glanced briefly at Damon, who gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I wish Brandon and Vanessa all the best." The words hung in the air for a beat, and Olivia could see the flicker of irritation in Patricia's eyes as she narrowed her gaze, her lips curling into a thin, disapproving smile. But instead of responding, she simply nodded, her gaze flicking dismissively to the side as she turned to speak to someone else. As Patricia walked away, Olivia let out a long, slow breath, the weight of the conversation finally lifting from her shoulders. Damon turned to her, his expression softening. "You handled that with grace," he said, his voice low, a quiet strength in his words. "I had to," Olivia replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "It's been a long time since I've had to face that part of my past." The air felt lighter now, as if the confrontation with Patricia had been the final test, the moment where Olivia had finally stepped into her own. And just like that, she realized that this was the beginning of something new. No longer tethered to her past, no longer needing to prove anything to anyone. Especially not Brandon, not Patricia, and certainly not the world that had once tried to define her. She was free. The following days, after the engagement party, felt like a whirlwind of emotions, swirling and tangling in ways Olivia couldn't quite decipher. She had done it. She had done it. She had attended the event, stood her ground in front of Brandon and his new life, and walked away with a sense of closure. But that sense of closure was a strange thing. It didn't bring the peace she had expected. Instead, it left her feeling like she had walked into a storm and only now realized how much she had weathered. And yet, amid the storm, there was a stillness, a quiet certainty that she hadn't felt in years. The phone call came 2 days later, just as Olivia was about to leave her studio after a long day of working on a new design project. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but there was something about it that made her hesitate before answering. She picked up on the third ring. Olivia. A voice on the other end was shaky, almost desperate. "It's Vanessa. I need to talk to you." Vanessa. Olivia's heart skipped. She hadn't expected to hear from her, especially not after everything that had transpired at the Four Seasons. Vanessa had been the picture, perfect fiancée that night, poised and calm, the perfect accessory to Brandon's grand vision. So why was she calling? "Vanessa, what's going on?" Olivia asked, her voice steady but full of curiosity. I need to meet you. Can we meet somewhere? Please." There was a slight tremor in Vanessa's voice that Olivia couldn't ignore. "It's about Brandon and everything that's happening." Something in her tone, something raw and vulnerable, made Olivia pause. She hesitated only for a moment before agreeing. "All right, let's meet tomorrow. I know a quiet tea shop in Midtown." "Will that work?" Vanessa agreed quickly, the relief in her voice palpable. The line went dead, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation was only the beginning of something much bigger, something she wasn't ready for but could no longer avoid. The next day, she found herself at Marlowe's tea house, tucked into a corner booth with a view of the bustling streets outside. She wasn't sure what to expect from Vanessa, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. She hadn't forgotten the way Vanessa had stood beside Brandon at the engagement party, looking like the epitome of a woman who had everything under control. Yet now, there was an unease in Vanessa's voice that made Olivia's stomach tighten. Something was unraveling. Vanessa arrived shortly after Olivia, dressed simply in a black trench coat that she quickly shed as she slid into the booth. She looked different than she had at the party. Her makeup wasn't as flawless, and there was a quiet exhaustion in her eyes that Olivia hadn't seen before. She looked human. And that, for some reason, unsettled Olivia more than anything. "Thank you for meeting me," Vanessa said quietly, avoiding Olivia's gaze for a moment as she folded her hands on the table. "I didn't know who else to turn to." Olivia studied her, trying to read her. "What's going on, Vanessa? You seemed fine at the party." Vanessa finally met her gaze, and Olivia saw it then. The cracks in her perfect exterior, the strain in her eyes. "I thought I was fine. But I'm not. I don't think I ever was." Her voice wavered, and for a brief moment, Olivia felt a pang of sympathy for the woman who had once been nothing more than a rival in her eyes. "Brandon, he's not the man I thought he was," Vanessa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's controlling. I didn't see it at first, but I'm seeing it now. Last night, at the engagement party, after everything happened, I confronted him. And he lost it. He's not who he pretends to be. And I can't go through with this wedding." Olivia's mind raced as she processed Vanessa's words. She had known Brandon, had been married to him long enough to see the layers beneath his polished persona. But hearing it from Vanessa, hearing her admit that she too had fallen into the same trap Olivia had, struck her in a way she hadn't expected. Vanessa swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her tea. "I've been trying to convince myself that I can handle it, that everything would be fine if I just played my part. But it's not. It's suffocating me. And now I'm trapped. My father is pressuring me to go through with it, but I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure I can. I don't even know if I want to anymore." Olivia felt her heart tighten. She had been where Vanessa was, caught in the web of expectations, the constant pressure to be perfect, to please everyone but herself. She had broken free of it, but it had taken everything from her. And now, Vanessa was standing at the edge of that same precipice, facing a choice that would change everything. "You don't have to stay trapped, Vanessa," Olivia said gently, her voice calm and steady. "You don't owe anyone anything, especially not him." Vanessa looked up at Olivia, her eyes brimming with tears. "I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm going crazy. But there's a part of me that feels like maybe I'm not the only one he's been manipulating. Maybe I'm not the only one he's been using." The words hit Olivia like a punch to the gut. She had known Brandon was selfish, but the depths of his manipulation, the way he had used Vanessa to further his own agenda, it sickened her. "You're not alone in this," Olivia said softly, reaching across the table to touch Vanessa's hand. "If you need help, I'm here, but you need to confront him. You need to confront him. You need to take control of your life before it's too late." Vanessa nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know if I can do it, but I have to try." Olivia felt a flicker of something deep within her, a sense of solidarity, of understanding. She had once been trapped by Brandon's need to control, his obsession with winning. But she had escaped, rebuilt her life, and now it was time for Vanessa to do the same. It wouldn't be easy, but Olivia knew this was the first step for both of them. "You can do it," Olivia said, her voice firm and resolute. "You're stronger than you think." The morning after their meeting, Olivia woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing insistently on the bedside table. She groggily reached over, rubbing her eyes as she glanced at the screen. It was Amamira. Again. With a sigh, Olivia slid her finger across the screen, answering the call. "Olivia, you're not going to believe this." Amamira's voice was thick with excitement, her tone almost conspiratorial. "Turn on the TV, right now." A sense of dread settled over Olivia's chest as she sat up and flicked on the television. The news anchor's voice was the first thing she heard, cutting through the stillness of her apartment. Breaking news this morning. Brandon Walsh, CEO of Walsh Enterprises, is under investigation for fraud. Sources report that his company has been accused of falsifying records during a recent corporate merger, allegedly using his fiancée's family connections to secure favorable deals. This scandal comes just days after his highly public engagement to Vanessa Green, sparking concerns about his financial dealings and questionable ethics. The words hung in the air like a dark omen. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. Not so soon. She sat frozen, her hand gripping the edge of the couch as the anchor continued with the report. The once polished image of Brandon Walsh was now unraveling, piece by piece, in front of the world. "Amamira, what's going on?" Olivia's voice was tight, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had just heard. "Is this real? How did this happen?" "It's everywhere," Amamira replied, her voice laced with awe. "It's like the whole city is talking about it. Everyone's pulling out of their deals with him. I just heard Vanessa's father, Gerald Preston, has withdrawn all of his support. It's getting ugly fast." Olivia felt a strange, detached sense of satisfaction stir within her. She had spent years feeling overshadowed by Brandon, his arrogance and control clouding everything they once had. Now, the world was seeing him for what he really was, a man whose ambitions had gone too far, whose lies had caught up with him. It wasn't justice, but it was something close to it. As the news broadcasted more details about the investigation, Olivia's phone buzzed again, this time with a voicemail from an unfamiliar number. She didn't hesitate. Pressing play, Brandon's voice crackled through the speaker, filled with panic. "Olivia," he said, his tone shaky, desperate. "I don't know what's going on. They've frozen my accounts. Vanessa left me. Everything's falling apart, and I don't know what to do. You have to help me, please. I never wanted it to go this far. This wasn't supposed to happen." Olivia's chest tightened, a mixture of relief and revulsion swelling within her. She listened to the message once, then again, hearing the tremor in his voice. For so long, Brandon had been the one with the power, the one who called the shots. Now, here he was, reduced to nothing more than a broken man begging for help. But Olivia wasn't that woman anymore, the one who had once carried his mistakes, the one who had believed his promises. She had built a life for herself, a life that didn't revolve around Brandon Walsh. She deleted the voicemail without a second thought. The phone rang again almost immediately. It was Brandon. She let it ring out. There was no need to listen to his pleading voice anymore. It had taken her years to free herself from him, to rebuild herself from him, to rebuild herself after all the years of manipulation and control. She wasn't about to let him drag her back into his chaos now. Her fingers hovered over the screen, contemplating whether or not to block his number. But then she thought of Vanessa. She had seen it in her eyes when they'd spoken. The same vulnerability Olivia had felt when she was trapped in that life. She wasn't the enemy here. She was just a pawn, like Olivia had once been. And while Brandon's downfall wasn't her responsibility, maybe, just maybe, she could offer some help, something to tip the scale, to show that there was more to her than just the remnants of a broken marriage. Olivia stood up, pacing the room as she made the decision. This was it. The moment where she could finally close that chapter, not by holding on to the anger, but by taking the high road. She wasn't going to give Brandon the satisfaction of seeing her crumble, but she wasn't going to turn her back on Vanessa either. She picked up her phone and dialed Vanessa's number, feeling her heart race as it rang. The voice that answered was tentative, almost fearful. "Olivia." Vanessa sounded surprised, but there was something else, something Olivia couldn't quite place. "You're calling?" "Yes," Olivia said softly, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions coursing through her. "I think we need to talk." Over the next few days, Olivia and Vanessa met several times, their conversations a mixture of empathy, caution, and quiet determination. Vanessa was still processing everything. Hermessa was still processing everything. Her father's pressure, Brandon's manipulation, and her own growing sense of betrayal. But as Olivia listened, she could see the cracks in the armor, the desire to break free from the life she had been handed. It wasn't easy for either of them, but Olivia knew this was a battle that only Vanessa could win. Still, Olivia was there, quietly supporting her, offering her a path forward. They didn't need to bring down the world together. They just needed to build something new. And when the day came, when the press and the public were screaming for answers, and Brandon's life crumbled under the weight of his lies, Olivia knew she had made the right choice. She was no longer defined by her past, by the man who had once tried to break her. She had reclaimed her life, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. A week passed, and the whirlwind of Brandon's scandal continued to swirl, its ripples touching everyone it came in contact with. Olivia could feel it creeping into her life, into every conversation she overheard at work, into the murmur of the streets when people spoke of her ex-husband's downfall. It was as if the universe had decided to make an example of him, and in doing so, it reminded Olivia of everything she had once endured. The strange thing was, the more the world turned its attention to Brandon, the more Olivia felt herself slipping away from it all, like a spectator watching a film she'd long since forgotten. One evening, just as she was finishing up some sketches for a new client at her studio, her phone buzzed insistently. It was an unknown number, one she hadn't seen before. She hesitated before answering, her thumb hovering over the screen for a beat longer than usual. Part of her already knew who it was. Part of her had been waiting for this moment. "Olivia." The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost shaky. "It's Brandon." Her heart skipped. His voice, so familiar and yet so alien now, sent a chill down her spine. "Brandon," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral, though a sharp sting of bitterness rose within her. "What do you want?" I need to talk to you," Brandon said, his voice cracking slightly. "I know you've heard everything. I know you've seen the headlines. But I need to explain. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear, I never thought it would blow up like this." Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. It was exactly what she had been waiting for. The call, the apology, the desperate plea. And yet, hearing it now, hearing the desperation in his voice, made her feel nothing but disgust. This man, the one who had once held so much power over her, was now reduced to nothing more than a hollow shell of his former self. A man begging for redemption, for sympathy, he had never once given to her. "Explain," she said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "Explain what exactly? How you lied to everyone, how you manipulated your way through life, how you tore me down and made me feel like I wasn't good enough, or how you dragged me into your mess and then tossed me aside when you were done." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. She could almost hear him trying to gather his thoughts, trying to form words that could somehow fix what he had broken. "I never meant to hurt you, Olivia," he finally said, his voice low, almost pleading. "You know, I never meant for any of this to happen." A laugh bubbled up from deep within her, harsh and bitter. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice laced with irony. "You never meant to hurt me. You just did it without even thinking. You were too busy trying to win, trying to control everything around you, to even notice the damage you were causing." She paused, her grip tightening around the phone. "You've lost everything now, haven't you? Your empire, your reputation, your future. And now, you want me to feel sorry for you?" There was silence on the other end, and Olivia could feel her pulse quicken, her emotions rising to the surface. She had spent years letting him manipulate her, letting him twist her feelings until she no longer knew where she ended and he began. But not anymore. Not now. "I don't need your apology, Brandon," she said, her voice finally steady. "You don't get to undo the past. You don't get to walk back into my life like nothing happened. You've already taken enough from me." She could hear him struggling, could feel his frustration and confusion seeping through the line. "Olivia, please," he pleaded. "I just want to make things right. Can't we at least talk about this? I know things ended badly, but I never stopped caring about you." Olivia's chest tightened, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she had lost. The years spent in that toxic marriage. The years spent in that toxic marriage. The years spent shrinking beneath his expectations. And then, something inside her shifted. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to care about you too. But caring about you, Brandon, meant losing myself. And I'm not willing to do that anymore. Not for you, not for anyone." She let the words hang between them for a moment before adding, "This conversation is over. Don't call me again." Before he could say anything else, she ended the call, her finger hovering over the button as the silence on the other end echoed in her ears. As the finality of her decision settled in, she felt something inside her shift. It wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was freedom. True freedom. Olivia set the phone down on her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she exhaled, the weight of years of manipulation lifting from her shoulders. For the first time, she wasn't reacting to him. She wasn't letting him pull her back into his drama, his chaos. She was choosing herself, and that was the greatest power she had ever had. And just like that, she realized she was done. Done with Brandon. Done with the past. And now with the past, and now with Damon by her side, she had the chance to finally build something that was truly her own. A future where she no longer had to prove her worth to anyone but herself. The following week arrived with a sense of both anticipation and dread hanging in the air, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Olivia had spent the past few days trying to focus on her work, designing her latest project, meeting with new clients, and moving forward with her life. But even in the quiet moments, she could feel it. Something was about to change. She had no way of knowing just how much. It all started with an unexpected invitation. The message arrived via a courier, a large cream-colored envelope embossed with gold lettering, its weight almost symbolic. Olivia held it for a moment, her fingers hesitating on the edge of the seal. There it was, the next chapter of her story, or perhaps the final act in a drama she had long since moved past. As she tore open the envelope, the invitation inside was impossibly extravagant, detailing the upcoming gala at the Four Seasons for Brandon and Vanessa's engagement. Olivia's stomach churned. It wasn't the party itself. It was what it represented. It was the glaring contrast between the life Brandon had tried to build for himself and the one she had fought to create after their divorce. The picture, perfect life he had always wanted, the social clout, the status, the power, everything that had once consumed him, and by extension, her, was now on display for the world to see. But Olivia no longer cared about that life. Not really. Yet, as the days went on, she couldn't shake the thought that she had to face it. She wasn't going to let Brandon's image of success overshadow her any longer. She had come too far to shrink back now. With that resolve, Olivia decided to go, not to relive the past, but to make a statement, to show the world, and more importantly, herself, that she was no longer the woman she had once been. The night of the gala, Olivia stood before her full-length mirror, the deep emerald green gown she had chosen hugging her curves in a way that felt almost foreign to her. She looked at herself, really looked at herself, and saw someone different, stronger, more assured. Gone was the woman who had once cowered under Brandon's gaze. Tonight, she was someone else. Someone who had fought for her independence, who had built a life on her own terms. And with Damon by her side, someone who would no longer let the ghosts of the past dictate her future. Damon, as always, looked effortlessly elegant beside her. His calm presence beside her gave Olivia a quiet strength that she hadn't realized she needed until now. He was a quiet storm, steady and unyielding, and in his eyes, Olivia saw something she had long ago stopped looking for in other people: belief in her, not because of what she had done for him, or because of what she had done for him, or because of some grand gesture, but simply because he admired who she was. The event was everything Olivia had imagined it would be. A sea of faces all polished and perfected, a facade of perfect lives, of perfect lives, of perfect marriages, of everything that once seemed so out of reach. The grand ballroom at the Four Seasons glittered with chandeliers, gold-trimmed details, and impeccable service. Every inch of the room screamed wealth and exclusivity, a world that once defined Brandon's life. As soon as they entered, Olivia's gaze flickered toward the center of the room. There was Brandon, surrounded by a group of admirers, his smile wide and confident, the perfect picture of success. Vanessa, standing by his side, was every bit the woman Olivia had feared she would become, poised, composed, and radiating a kind of cold beauty. But as Olivia observed the couple from across the room, something in her chest tightened. There was no warmth in their connection, only the calculated play of two people who had spent years convincing themselves that this was their destiny. As they approached, Brandon caught sight of them. His expression froze for a moment, surprise flashing across his face before he masked it with his usual arrogance. "Olivia," he said, his voice smooth but forced, as if their encounter was a mere formality. "It's been a while. You look, well," he gave Damon a curt nod, sizing him up with a quiet, almost imperceptible wariness. "Thank you," Olivia replied, her voice cool and composed. "It's good to see you, Brandon." She didn't add anything more, didn't acknowledge the years of pain, of resentment. Tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was about her stepping to her own light. Vanessa, with a practiced smile, extended her hand. "Olivia, it's lovely to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you." Olivia took her hand, but there was nothing warm in the gesture. Nothing sincere. "It's nice to meet you, Vanessa. I hope you're both enjoying the evening." Vanessa's smile remained, but Olivia could see the subtle tension in her posture, the slight hesitation in her eyes. And suddenly Olivia knew. Vanessa was in the same trap she had once been in, standing in the shadow of Brandon's overwhelming ambition. The conversation moved on, as these things always did at high society events, to pleasantries and small talk. Olivia felt herself growing more and more distant, as if the conversation was happening to someone else entirely. This was Brandon's world, and it was a world that no longer had a place for her. As the night wore on, Olivia found herself retreating to a quiet corner, her hand gently resting on Damon's arm. It was a subtle gesture, but one that spoke volumes. The world they had been part of, the world they had been part of, the world Brand had created, felt hollow to her now, and she realized, with startling clarity, that the freedom she had fought for wasn't just physical. It was the peace that came with knowing she no longer needed to compete in this world. As they left the event, stepping back into the cool night air, the weight of the evening began to settle on her. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about showing Brandon he had failed. It was about her journey, her growth, her decision to reclaim her life. Not in the shadow of a man who had once controlled her, but in the light of the future she was building. And that was more than enough. The following days were a whirlwind for Olivia. With the fallout from Brandon's scandal-making headlines, she had to brace herself for the inevitable social shifts and personal revelations that would come from the chaos. The once quiet hum of her life had transformed into a storm, each gust of wind stronger than the last, and yet through it all, she found herself standing tall, the weight of the past no longer dragging her down. What had once felt like her worst nightmare was now an odd sort of liberation. And then, as if the universe were handing her the final test, the phone call came. It was late one evening, just as she was winding down after a long day of meetings and design plans, that the familiar, dreaded number flashed on her phone screen. Brandon. Her stomach churned at the sight, but something inside her urged her to answer it. Maybe it was the last piece of closure she needed, or maybe she just wanted to hear it. Hear him finally break down in the same way he had broken her. Olivia. His voice was hollow, filled with desperation. I'm sorry. You were right. Everything you said about me. I can't pretend anymore. I don't know how it all went so wrong, but I've lost everything. My company, my reputation, Vanessa. He trailed off, and Olivia could almost picture him pacing, his hands running through his hair in frantic disbelief. I need you to understand, this wasn't the plan. I thought I could control it all. But now I'm a mess. Please, Olivia, you have to believe me. Olivia took a slow breath, her pulse steady as she absorbed his words. The past few months had taught her that nothing he said could ever be trusted again, but it didn't mean his pain didn't resonate with her. For a moment, she allowed herself to reflect on the man she had once loved. He had been someone full of promise, someone she believed in. But the man on the other end of the phone was not the same one she had married. This man was broken, stripped of the power he had once wielded, and for the first time, she realized that wasn't her problem to fix. I heard everything, Brandon, Olivia said softly, but her voice was firm. I don't need your apology. I don't need to hear that you regret what happened between us. The truth is, I've moved on, and I'm done. You don't get to drag me back into your mess. Not anymore. There was silence for a long moment. Olivia could almost feel the weight of his realization that there was nothing left for him to cling to. I know you've moved on, he finally said, his voice bitter. But can't you just help me one last time? I need a lawyer. I need money. I need someone to believe in me. You were always the one who kept us together. I need you, Olivia. Her chest tightened, but not with sympathy. No, the feeling was different now, clearer, like the final stitch being pulled from a wound. You needed me to fix you, Olivia said, her voice laced with a new, surprising clarity. But the truth is, Brandon, you never saw me. Not for who I was, and certainly not for what I needed. You were never interested in building a partnership. It was always about you. And now you want me to bail you out, to be the one who saves you, when all you've done is tear me down. I didn't. Don't, Olivia cut him off, her voice unwavering. I'm done trying to save someone who never believed in me. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I'm not part of your plan anymore. And I'm certainly not going to be the one who helps you climb out of the hole you've dug for yourself. Brandon's response came quickly, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a low laugh that held no humor. You're right, he said finally, his tone a mixture of bitterness and defeat. I always thought I could control everything, make everything bend to my will. But I couldn't control you, could I? I couldn't control how you grew, how you became someone else, someone better. The words hit her harder than she expected. They were the first honest ones he'd spoken in their entire conversation, and though they stung, they also solidified everything she had come to realize. She wasn't the same woman anymore. She wasn't the woman who had waited for his approval or for his love or for the validation that he would never give. She had found something far more valuable. She had found something far more valuable. Her own strength, her own purpose, her own freedom. I've learned that sometimes, Olivia said, her voice steady and calm, we need to walk away from things to become who we're meant to be. And I've done that. I don't need you anymore, Brandon. I don't need you anymore, Brandon. He was quiet for a long while, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, hollow. Olivia. And with that, the conversation ended. Olivia sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the call lifting off her shoulders. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She wasn't sad. She wasn't sad. She was free. Free from him, free from his manipulation, and free from the life she had tried so desperately to hold on to. The next morning, she woke to the quiet certainty that her life had finally turned a corner. Brandon was no longer her problem. He wasn't her past anymore, and as she stepped into the future, with Damon beside her, she knew that whatever came next would be hers to define. Not his, not anyone else's, just hers. And that, she realized, was exactly how it was meant to be. The days following the gala were a blur of uncertainty and anticipation for Olivia. It felt like life was teetering on the edge of something she couldn't quite define. Despite the overwhelming emotions that had surged in her during the event, seeing Brandon and Vanessa, hearing their rehearsed words, feeling the weight of the past, Olivia had left the gala with a surprising sense of calm. Something had shifted within her, something that told her the chapter with Brandon was truly over. She had confronted her past and, in doing so, found herself standing on firmer ground than ever before. But as time passed, the media frenzy around Brandon's collapse intensified. The stories kept coming, and it was impossible to ignore the chaos that now defined his life. Olivia knew the worst of it was just beginning, and yet she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of detachment as she read the headlines, her fingers tapping the surface of her phone screen. She was no longer tethered to him in any meaningful way. What had once consumed her, what had once defined her world, was now just background noise. One afternoon, as she was sipping her coffee at a small cafe in the city, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Amamira, and she could tell from the urgency in the text that something significant had happened. Olivia, you need to see this. It's huge. Turn on the news. With a growing sense of unease, Olivia quickly opened the TV app on her phone. The newscaster's voice rang out, sharp and authoritative. Breaking news. Brandon Walsh, CEO of Walsh Enterprises, is under investigation for serious financial crimes, including embezzlement and corporate fraud. The investigation is linked to recent mergers, and sources claim that his fiancée, Vanessa Green, may have unknowingly been involved in these transactions. The shocking twist. Vanessa has reportedly cut ties with Brandon, citing concerns about his actions and integrity. More details as this story unfolds. The words hit Olivia like a tidal wave. She had known Brandon's ambition would eventually catch up with him, but to hear it so publicly, to see his empire crumble in front of the world, it felt surreal. Part of her wanted to feel a sense of vindication, but the truth was, she felt a deep sense of emptiness. For all the damage he had caused her, for all the damage he had caused her, for all the years of heartbreak, she couldn't bring herself to rejoice in his downfall. It was a hollow victory, the kind of closure that felt as though it came too late. Amamira's next message popped up on her screen, her words even more frantic than before. Olivia, did you hear? Brandon's been arrested. It's all over the media now. Vanessa is distancing herself from him and his investors are pulling out. He's going down, and fast. The familiar pang of disgust stirred in Olivia's chest, but it was quickly overshadowed by a strange sense of resolve. She wasn't going to let this affect her. She wasn't going to let this affect her. She was no longer part of his narrative, no longer a character in his story. What mattered now was her future and the life she was building, piece by piece. As she sat there in the cafe, her thoughts began to drift back to Damon. He had been her anchor through all of this. From the moment they met, he had been a quiet force in her life, never pushing, never rushing. His steady presence had given her the confidence to believe in herself again, to believe in the possibility of a future free from Brandon's shadows. They had spent more time together in the weeks following the gala, and Olivia had realized that for the first time in years, she was genuinely happy. With Damon by her side, she felt like the woman she had always been meant to be. She thought about how far she had come. From the woman who once cowered under Brandon's dominance, afraid to speak her truth, to the woman she was now, independent, self-assured, and ready to embrace the future. She had built something beautiful, not just in her career, but in her heart. And it was Damon who had helped her realize that. He didn't want to fix her, didn't see her as a project to be completed. He simply saw her for who she was and loved her for it. The phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message. It was a call. Olivia checked the screen, surprised to see the name. Vanessa. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. They hadn't spoken since the gala. And while Olivia had offered her a sympathetic ear, she hadn't expected to hear from her directly. She answered the call, her breath catching slightly. Olivia. Vanessa's voice was fragile, strained. I'm sorry to call you like this, but Olivia's heart softened, the empathy she felt for Vanessa growing with each word. Of course. What's going on? There was a long pause before Vanessa spoke again, her voice trembling. I don't know what to do. I'm scared, Olivia. I didn't realize how deep Brendan's lies ran. I thought I knew him, but now everything's falling apart. He's been arrested, and I'm not sure who to trust I'm not sure who to trust anymore. Olivia's mind raced. She knew what it was like to be caught in a web of lies, to be blindsided by someone you thought you knew. She knew the pain Vanessa was going through. I understand, Vanessa, she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. I know this must be overwhelming. But you don't have to go through this alone. You're stronger than you think. And no matter what happens, this doesn't define you. Vanessa let out a shaky breath, the tension in her voice dissipating slightly. Thank you, she whispered. I'm trying to find my way out of all of this. And I think I need to step away from Brandon for good. It's not just the lies. It's everything. I need to take control of my own life. Olivia smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride for Vanessa, for the strength she was beginning to find within herself. You're making the right decision, Olivia said, her voice full of conviction. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. If you need anything, I'm here. The conversation ended soon after, and as Olivia hung up, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just moving forward in her own life. She was helping someone else do the same. She wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Vanessa. In that moment, Olivia realized that the real victory wasn't in watching Brandon's world crumble. It was in the freedom she had found, and in the knowledge that she could help others find theirs too. The future was hers, and it was more beautiful than she had ever imagined. The days that followed Brandon's public disgrace felt like a blur to Olivia. Each morning, she woke up with the familiar ache of the past still lingering somewhere deep inside her, but it was becoming easier to leave those feelings behind. The media frenzy around Brandon had only intensified, but Olivia was no longer interested in being part of that world. She had spent years consumed by his ambition, his lies, and his manipulation. But now, finally, it was all unraveling, and Olivia found herself walking away with more strength than she had ever imagined. But even as the pieces of Brandon's life scattered in the wake of his collapse, Olivia couldn't shake the strange sense of inevitability that had settled over her. She had faced her past. She had finally cut the last ties to her marriage, to the man who had once been the center of her universe. And yet, despite all of this, she felt like there was something still unfinished, something she needed to do, some final confrontation that would allow her to close this chapter for good. But what that was, she didn't know yet. One evening, as Olivia was leaving her studio after another long day of meetings and design work, her phone buzzed. It was an unexpected message from Amamira. "Olivia, I think you should prepare yourself. Vanessa just reached out to me. She wants to meet with you." Her heart skipped a beat. Vanessa. The woman who had, in some ways, replaced Olivia in Brandon's life. The one who had taken her place at his side. The woman he had chosen after their marriage fell apart. Olivia had never expected to hear from her directly. They had only exchanged a few polite words at the gala, but since then, Olivia had distanced herself from the entire situation. The thought of sitting face to face with Brandon's fiancée was uncomfortable, to say the least, but Olivia knew it was inevitable. There was still something lingering between them, an unspoken bond forged by shared history and mutual pain. The next morning, Olivia found herself walking into a cozy tea shop, the soft hum of conversation in the background. As she stepped inside, she spotted Vanessa sitting at a corner booth, her back straight, her hands trembling slightly as she folded and refolded the napkin in her lap. When she saw Olivia, she stood, her eyes wide with a mix of nervousness and something else. Guilt, maybe. She gestured to the seat across from her, a silent invitation. "Olivia," Vanessa said quietly, her voice wavering as she forced a smile. "Thank you for coming. I know this is strange, but I needed to talk to you." Olivia nodded and sat down, her hands clasped in her lap. The tension in the air was palpable, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Olivia wasn't sure what to expect from this conversation, but she knew one thing. This was a conversation she needed to have, for her own peace of mind. Vanessa cleared her throat, her eyes downcast as she spoke. "I don't know where to start. After everything that happened with Brandon, I just feel lost. I don't know who I am anymore. He's not the man I thought he was. Everything he said, everything I thought I knew about him. It's all been a lie, and I'm scared." Olivia leaned forward slightly, her heart softening. She could hear the pain in Vanessa's voice, the disillusionment. She had once felt the same way, caught in the web of Brandon's lies, his grand ambitions, and his promises that never quite materialized. She could relate more than she wanted to admit. "It's okay," Olivia said, her voice calm. "I understand more than you think." Vanessa looked up, her eyes searching Olivia's face. "I thought I had control over everything," she continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I'm starting to see that maybe I've been blinded by him. By his success, his power, his image. I've been so focused on trying to keep up, trying to be what he wanted me to be, that I forgot who I really am." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment there was a deep silence, a shared understanding. Olivia had once been there. She had once tried to be everything Brandon wanted, to mold herself into the perfect image of the woman he had expected her to be. But in doing so, she had lost herself. And now, sitting across from Vanessa, she realized that this was what the other woman needed most. Someone who understood. "You're not alone in this," Olivia said softly. "I've been where you are. Brandon, he's good at making you believe that he's the center of everything, that his success, his life, is what matters most. But that's not true. And it doesn't have to be your truth." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears and she looked down, her fingers gripping the napkin tightly. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "My father is pressuring me to marry him. I'm supposed to be his perfect partner to help him climb higher. But I don't know if I can. And I don't know if I should." Olivia took a deep breath, her own emotions swirling in her chest. She had been where Vanessa was now. She knew how difficult it was to step away, to let go of the image of perfection that Brandon had painted. But she also knew that the only way to truly find peace was to walk away from the lies. "You don't owe him anything," Olivia said firmly. "You owe it to yourself to make your own choices. You don't have to follow his path. You can choose a different one." For the first time since Olivia had walked in, Vanessa's face softened. The fear that had gripped her seemed to loosen, and she exhaled, shakily, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I needed to hear that." Olivia nodded, her heart swelling with empathy. "You're stronger than you know, Vanessa. And whatever you decide, make sure it's what's best for you, not for anyone else." As Vanessa wiped her tears away, she gave Olivia a tentative smile. "I think I'm ready to make my own decisions," she said quietly, the tremor in her voice still present, but fading. "I don't want to be part of his world anymore." Olivia smiled back, feeling a sense of peace settle in her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't just walking away from her past. She was helping someone else do the same. The two women sat together in the quiet tea shop, no longer bound by Brandon, no longer weighed down by the past. They had found their own paths, and in doing so, they had both found something that had been missing for so long: freedom. The story of Olivia and Vanessa is a powerful reminder that no matter how tangled our pasts may be, we have the strength to rise above it. Sometimes, we find ourselves trapped in relationships or situations that diminish our worth, whether through manipulation, deceit, or simply the weight of someone else's expectations. But true freedom comes when we stop allowing the past to define us and start making choices that align with who we really are. Both Olivia and Vanessa had to face the hard truth that they had been living under the shadow of someone else's ambition and desires. They had to find the courage to break free, to step into their own power, and realize that they deserved more, than what had been handed to them. The real lesson here is that self-worth doesn't come from validation from others. It comes from within. It's about choosing to value yourself, setting boundaries and not being afraid to walk away from what doesn't serve you, no matter how difficult it may seem. Life is full of challenges and unexpected turns, but with each decision, we shape our future. It's never too late to reclaim your own narrative, to choose happiness, and to live authentically. The strength we need to change our lives is already inside us. We just have to trust ourselves enough to unlock it. Where are you watching from today? And if you enjoyed this story and want more content like it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Thank you for being here, and remember, your strength matters, and so do you.